take up to 2 years. But the celebration stopped in Scotland as Scottish Prime Minister is now calling for a referendum of independence from the UK. Are these developments on the eve of the Dutch election pushing the entire continent to the brink? Here to discuss, Deroy Murdock and the End of Europe author, James Kirchick. James, I got to start with you with a book with that title. You kind of saw some of this coming, no?
Yeah, and a lot of us who opposed Brexit predicted this because Scotland is very pro-European. They voted more than any other region in the UK to stay within the European Union. In fact, this was one of the reasons why the last time there was a Scottish independence referendum in 2014, it failed because Scots didn't want to leave the UK and be outside of the EU. And now they face the prospect of being taken out of the EU against their will. And so this was all very predictable, and I'm afraid that we may see the dissolution of the United Kingdom.
Well, I mean, in the meantime, though, Deroy, a lot of people are celebrating or excited about perhaps the dissolution of the European Union and the euro as a common currency, saying that it just simply didn't work.
Yeah, I think a lot of what the European Union was essentially was getting the euro so that all these countries that would have been at war at each other's throats for so many centuries would be so economically intertwined that they really couldn't go to war again. So I think this was really a political effort rather than an economic effort. The EU's been really, these people in Brussels giving all sorts of instructions to people and everything from how to run their economies to literally the measurement of pickles and cauliflowers and this sort of ridiculous nonsense. And it's this sort of regulatory overreach and micromanagement that have driven people up the walls, and now they're fanning out in all sorts of different directions rather than remaining unified.
Yeah, and to that point, you know, Scotland wanting to be tethered to the EU. I guess ultimately that would be up to the Scottish people. But do you see where the Brits could be upset that Brussels have become so overbearing and not even willing to bend? Particularly, let's not even call it Brussels, right? Let's be honest. It all goes back to Germany, and not even wanting to bend on the smallest issues, from protecting the border and having more say over that to some of the more arcane things that Deroy just mentioned.
Well, the UK has had a pretty special relationship with Europe. I mean, it's not in the euro. They have the pound, so they're not affected by the bailouts of Greece and whatnot. And they're also not in the Schengen zone, which is the free movement area that's on the continent. So they basically have had this sort of special exemptions from these rules. And also, most of the laws that are passed in Britain, they're passed by the British Parliament. There were these exaggerations made about, you know, 60%. Right. People were claiming 60% of the laws were coming from Brussels. That's not true.
Well, let me ask you about, let me switch topics for a quick moment because I want to get your thoughts on the election in the Netherlands. Apparently, there won't be a coalition government, but a message could be sent by the Dutch people pretty loud and clear that could influence other elections, including France.
Yes, I mean, you're seeing the right-wing populist Geert Wilders, who he may or may not win the most votes, but all the other parties have agreed that they're not going to form a coalition with him. He's probably going to be kept out of any government, that's for sure. But if he does end up winning the most votes, that could send a signal that perhaps a similar leader like Marine Le Pen in France, her party could also come out on top, although it's also unlikely. But, you know, in this, after Trump and Brexit, I've stopped making predictions.
Deroy, real quick, I got to ask you, I mean, these other politicians who don't want to create these coalition governments, aren't they just putting their heads in the sand, trying to ignore the will of the people?
I think there is that, and what they're also ignoring, the fact is that a lot of these Muslim immigrants who've come into Western Europe are not assimilating. Some of them are, some of them are doing a good job, but there are many of them who just refuse to assimilate and become Dutch, become German, what have you. And you've seen an increase in crimes, increase in rapes, many of these sorts of things associated with people who've come in from the Middle East, unfortunately. Not all of them, but some of them, and I think a lot of what you're seeing is a reaction to that.
But enough that people are very, very concerned. Guys,
Absolutely.
Thank you both very much. Senate Democrats led by Chuck Schumer are now threatening to shut down the government, and you won't believe why. I'm going to tell you when we come back.
Afoot and lighthearted, I take to the open road. Healthy, free, the world before me, the long brown path before me leading wherever I choose.